Hey, Anna.
Hey, how are y'all?
Good. We were just thinking about getting started here, and we know that you suggested that we could do an introduction of everyone on the line, which would be great. So we have a sense of who's in the room. Did you want to say anything before that to get us started?
I had not prepared a speech, but I was just going to say that I really appreciate you guys putting this together and taking the time to present it to us and go over any questions or concerns that we may have. And so with that, I appreciate it.
Great. Well, sounds good. So I'm Ashley Dare. For those of you who don't know me, I'm an associate professor at Virginia Tech in the Department of Fish and Wildlife Conservation. I'm a conservation social scientist, and as you'll hear a little bit later in the presentation, we've been working on a broad scale wildlife viewing project across the whole US, and about 15 states have participated with us more closely in that and have their own state specific reports, of which you all are one. So Anna had suggested, and we thought it'd be a great idea if we could just go around and hear from you all where you work in the agency and what sort of relationship you have in your job now, or you think you could in the future, to wildlife viewers, and that will help us as we go through the presentation to make sure that we emphasize pieces that would be most of interest to you. Maybe I'll let Christy quickly introduce herself too, and then we can take turns going around with those of you from the state agency.
Thanks, Ashley. Hello, everyone. My name is Christy Patotsky, and I am a PhD student in the Dare Human Dimensions Lab at Virginia Tech. And I'm also the lead author on the South Carolina report for Wildlife Viewer Survey. In addition to working on the Wildlife Viewer project, I'm an author on a number of the other reports. I also study bird feeding, specifically Project Feeder Watch and participatory scientists and their relationships to bird feeding. But with that, I'll hand it over to Anna to introduce herself.
All right, so I'm Anna Smith. I'm the State Wildlife Action Plan Coordinator and Forest Legacy Coordinator, but I also write all of the acquisition grants, land acquisition grants for the agency. And I always think that it's good to know what our constituents are thinking about our agency and what's important to them and how things have changed over time from a traditional hunting and fishing use of our lands to sometimes just hiking or bird watching or just sitting in the outdoors. So it's always good to stay on top of it in order to stay relevant.
All right, I'll just go around in the order that I see to make things easiest. Greg, are you able to introduce yourself? Greg Lucas?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm not sure why my video isn't on there, but anyway, my name is Greg Lucas, and I'm the Public Information Officer with SCDNR and part of the Office of Media and Outreach. And of course, we do a number of articles, both press releases, magazine articles in South Carolina Wildlife Magazine, and then our social media about wildlife viewing. I mean, that's a very popular topic, as we can see when we put something out on that. So that we're really glad that y'all are doing this.
Great. Thanks, Greg. And you'll certainly hear about some communications insights that we have along the way. And I'm sure other parts that aren't specific to communications will be helpful too. So good to hear that you're on the line. Ross.
I'm Ross Self. I'm the chief of the freshwater fishery section. And I don't really know enough about the project to speak to it in any meaningful way. So I'm anxious to learn more about what y'all are up to.
Great. Thanks so much for joining us. Cindy.
Hi, I'm Cindy Thompson. Can you hear me? Okay. I'm one of the editors at South Carolina Wildlife Magazine, and we regularly feature stories about the outdoors, hunting, fishing, nature viewing, hiking, camping, all of those things. And so we're just trying to stay in tune with the latest research.
Great. Thanks so much, Cindy. Alex.
Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Pedraza. I am the Community Engagement Manager for the department. And we work with non-traditional audiences, specifically the African American and Hispanic communities. And we offer a wide variety of programs. We partner in-house and also with other partners outside of our agency to offer different outdoor recreation opportunities. And we have learned that non-traditional audiences prefer a lot of the non-consumptive uses of natural resources. So that is why we are here. I also enjoy birding and hiking in my free time. So.
Great, thanks so much, Alex. And you'll see later, the rest of you will see later in the presentation that Alex and Diana contributed to our national report too, with the example of their work. So it was great to be able to feature that. Amanda? Amanda, are you able to introduce yourself?
Yes, sorry, I don't have a camera on this computer and the volume only works a little bit, but
No worries, we can hear you.
I'm the Director of Communications here at the Department of Natural Resources. I work with Alex, Diana, and Greg, Cindy, and that team. Interested to dive further. I've read the report a couple times, but to dive further into it.
Great, thanks. Glad to have you on board. Diana.
Hello, I am Diana Prestigiacomo. I work directly under Alex in the community engagement program. I'm the community engagement coordinator. So I second everything Alex said as far as things that we do, including the hiking and bird watching in my free time. So I'm excited to learn more.
Thanks, Diana. Kieran.
Hi, I'm Kieran Ash. I'm a graphic designer with the DNR. So I make some of the stuff that we put out. So I'm just really curious about everything in the report.
Great, thanks, Kieran. Blake?
Hey, good afternoon. Blake Kepler, Deputy Director for the Marine Resources Division. So we manage some lands and lots of coastal and marine resources that people interact with, both consumptively and non-consumptively. So we understand that, you know, there's shifts and change and how people are interacting with natural resources. So looking forward to hearing more about that.
Thanks, Blake. Lynn.
Hey, everybody. I'm Lynn Quattro, and I am the Assistant Chief of Freshwater Fisheries. We have several properties for state lakes and for our hatcheries that are currently used by non-consumptive users when they're open for walking or hiking or birding. And I just want to get more information about that. So thank you.
Great, thanks, Lynn. And Tanya.
Oops, sorry, my camera's not acting up. It is acting up. We won't worry about that. I'm Tanya Darden. I'm the director of the Marine Resources Research Institute down here in Charleston. I appreciate you guys putting this presentation together and sharing the report with us. My interest is the same, similar to Blake and Lynn's, in terms of we know that there's non-consumptive users of our resource, and understanding what their voice is as we go forward and design research, make decisions is an important one. So appreciate this input.
Great, thanks so much. I think I got everyone, and great to have a sense of who all is here and what your interests are. I appreciate you all sharing that. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up our presentation here, and we will get rolling. We'll probably hold most questions to the end, but you can feel free to put them in the chat. And if it's something that we can quickly address, we will. And that way we'll make sure that we get through everything before the end of our time together. We should have time for questions at the end. Oops, let's see. I'm going to try that there. Okay. And Christy, does that look good? And are you seeing the right screen?
All good.
Okay, fantastic. I couldn't see you, so I didn't see if there was a thumbs up.
Okay, sorry, yeah.
All right, so we've already done our welcomes and thank yous. So I'm going to move right on to the screenshot of the cover of the report that we're talking about here today. As Christy mentioned, she was the lead author of the South Carolina report on the wildlife viewers survey. Many of you have already taken a look at it, provided feedback on that, really appreciate it. If you haven't had a chance to check it out or to share it with others on your staff, we encourage you to do so. Christy is going to drop in the chat pod a link to the report. And additionally, you can also hold up your phone and use the QR code there to bring it up. I also will say throughout the presentation, we'll be dropping links into the chat. About a week after your presentation, we'll send you a follow-up email with all of those links and in addition, a recording of today's webinar. So if you don't catch them all as they come by and you're willing to wait for a month, or not a month, a week, then you'll be good on that front. Today in our presentation, we're not going to be able to go through everything in this report. Really comprehensive, lots of detail in there. We're trying to emphasize here today the key findings that we think would be of interest tied into the recommendations at the end of the report. But if there's certain components that you are interested in digging into more, we encourage you to check out the report. It has full figures with the graphs as well as tables for all of the information and additional pieces that we might talk in brief about today, or it might come up as we're answering a question for someone. So you've already heard from us about who Christy and I are. Additionally, Emily Singular is a master's student who's been heavily involved in this project from the beginning. She's not able to join today's webinar, but she's another co-author on this report and the lead author on some other states' reports. Okay, so let's talk about what we're hoping to accomplish here today. Like I said, we're going to focus in on the survey findings to give you a profile of the viewers in the state, help you think about how you can support wildlife viewers, also help you think about how you might broaden your relevance to wildlife viewers. Many of you brought that up. And we're going to do that in a way where we emphasize wildlife viewers who don't already hunt and fish. You'll see later in our presentation, you have wildlife viewers who are doing both in your state, and those who hunt and fish have a stronger connection to you all. So really thinking about broadening relevance to connecting to those who don't hunt and fish can be a way to expand the constituents who are in support of your agency. And then finally, thinking about financial support opportunities for wildlife viewers, what they're currently accessing or what might be of interest. So those are the components that we'll emphasize in the data that we share with you. First, I just want to give you a little bit of background. Some of you said that you aren't as familiar with this project. Some of you are, so it might be some review for you. I hope you don't mind, but we'll move through it quickly. So first, the definition that we used for wildlife viewing. We asked people if they have experience closely observing, feeding, and photographing wildlife, visiting parks and natural areas to observe, feed, or photograph wildlife, or maintaining plantings or natural areas for the benefit of wildlife. If they did any of those things, they could consider themselves a wildlife viewer and were able to enter the survey. The definition that we have here is based on the National Survey of Hunting, Fishing, and Wildlife-Related Recreation. We wanted to be consistent with that since so many states do rely on that survey for understanding the trends of various recreation types in their state. And so we just tweaked it in a minor way in order for it to work for our survey. We did also emphasize that wildlife viewing, we were looking at people who don't just simply notice wildlife while they're doing something else. So if you happen to see a squirrel run across the sidewalk in front of you, that wasn't what we were looking for. We were looking for people who are intentionally viewing wildlife and not just haphazardly seeing wildlife while they were doing something else like gardening, exercising, hunting, or fishing, or intentionally scouting for game. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the trends in wildlife viewing, and it's growing wildlife recreation in the US. In this graph, you can see the trends from 1996 to 2016 in the US. And the estimate now, based upon the 2016 report, is that there's 86 million wildlife viewers in the US. And that's a national participation rate of about a third of the US population. Quite substantial and quite higher than any other wildlife recreation activities that people participate in. In South Carolina, based upon the 2011 survey where you had state-specific data, the estimate at that point was about 1 in 4 wildlife viewers, but I would expect that it's higher given the national trends increasing, and it tends to be that the state trends have followed those national trends. Additionally, that increase comes primarily from a rise in around the home wildlife viewing. From 2011 to 2016, you see that big jump. And that was a lot of people who were picking up wildlife viewing out their window, in their backyards, off their porch, whatever that might be for them. And then at the same time, I'm sure many of you are aware that hunting and angling rates have declined or remained stable depending on what state we're looking at or what type of hunting we're talking about. So as we heard from you all, and we heard from many of the other states who were interested in us doing this project with them, they wanted to really understand viewers more because they recognize these trends, that the numbers of viewers are growing. And so their potential influence in the state is really increasing as well. And they can also be difficult for states to reach. There's not an easy mechanism like you have for hunting and angling with databases that have people's email address and their phone number or their mail address, and ways that you can get in touch with them, whether it be for research or for the purposes of marketing and communications. And generally, we heard from states that there's a lack of information on viewers' thoughts, preferences, and behavior. The national survey has been excellent for helping provide estimates of numbers, financial contributions to states and to the economy, and for some basic things like number of days viewing around home or away from home. But it hasn't dug into things like conservation behavior or relationships with the state agency. And those were things that we heard from state agencies they really would like to know more about, because that would also be really helpful for them as they work with wildlife viewers. With the goal that many people had, similar to many of you on this call, of being able to better serve and communicate with viewers, and also underserved or non-traditional audiences, as Alex pointed out, oftentimes Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or other groups that agencies aren't connecting with as much, have a stronger interest in connecting through viewing than they would through more consumptive activities. And then agencies also expressed an interest in thinking about ways they could better connect viewers to mechanisms to contribute financially. Some states have those in place, others don't. And they recognize with declining license sales, they need to be thinking about how to find funding for the agency broadly, but then also in order to create programming specific to wildlife viewing. So this was a list of needs that we heard as we were starting this project from state agency representatives, and Anna was your state representative on our advisory committee. And we kept those in mind throughout the project. And we've heard again and again that these are really main reasons across states. And again, we heard them from you all here today as well. I'm not going to go into a full literature review on wildlife viewers other than those brief trends that I showed you, but we did start our project with assembling a literature review document that was meant to serve state agency staff. So we encourage you to check that out if you haven't already. It's a really readable document meant to serve people who work with wildlife viewers or have an interest in working with wildlife viewers. The sections are organized in an easy to use way, like who are wildlife viewers? What are their interests in conservation behavior? So you can easily skip to the section that that's of interest to you. And we've really tried to distill the literature in there to give you the key points that would be useful to you in your job. And then if you want to go read an entire article or report, there is a references section that you can dig in further with. So again, this is one of the links that Christy's putting in the chat, but we'll also email out to you in about a week. And as I mentioned, this project is part of a larger national and regional project that we worked with the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group of AFWA to receive grant support from Multistate grant. And so, of course, appreciate the support from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Services Wildlife and Sport Fishing Restoration Program and then also the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, and they were the lead on this phase of the project. In that national and regional report, it shows things not only by the whole US's numbers, but then by the Northeast, Southeast, Midwest, and West. So you could take a look at how your state results compare to the Southeast, if that's of interest to you. The other thing I wanted to point out is that in the recommendations section of that report, there's about 8 case studies, one of which is South Carolina. And we'll show you a few of those here today. But you might wish to read those. They provide a sort of the lessons learned from various states who've implemented projects with wildlife viewers that we think would be useful for other states to try based upon what we found in this survey. So with that, I'm going to turn things over to Christy, who's going to talk about the results or about the methods we used in the project.
Thanks, Ashley. Yeah, now I'm going to go into the survey methodology, talk a bit about the survey instrument itself, and also sort of present some of the initial findings on wildlife viewers to give you more background on who wildlife viewers are. So the survey was a panel questionnaire, and it was administered fully online via Qualtrics from October to December 2021. And we had a goal of 1,000 complete responses from each state. And we did achieve that with 1,007 respondents in South Carolina. That is excluding those who didn't successfully complete the survey, and they were removed for a number of reasons, and I'll explain those in a minute. But the survey was 117 questions, so you have a lot of information to gain from that, but it actually only took about 15 to 20 minutes to complete. Our first question, following the consent question, was our screening question, which read, in which, if any, of the following forms of wildlife viewing have you participated in the past 5 years? And then listed these 7 forms of wildlife viewing, including feeding wild birds, closely observing wildlife, and feeding other wildlife besides wild birds. And we did pull those 2 things out because we know that these might be 2 different forms of behavior. But it's important to bring up the screening question because if someone responded that they had not participated in any of those 7 forms of wildlife viewing in the past 5 years, they were then removed from the survey. And I like to emphasize this because this survey presents results on people who participate in wildlife viewing. We don't have information on people in South Carolina who don't participate in wildlife viewing. So I think that's just something important to keep in mind when we go through these results, particularly when we're talking about these consumptive wildlife viewers. So of these 117 survey questions, we have a long list. These cover demographic characteristics, viewing behavior and interest, duration, location, and frequency of participation, participation in other outdoor recreation, including hunting and fishing, which is an important part of our data analysis, level of specialization, in wildlife viewing as a practice, viewing related expenditures, barriers and social support in their participation in wildlife viewing, likelihood of participating in conservation behaviors, both generally and also in support of SCDNR. We can head to the next slide. Our familiarity with, their perceptions of, and trust in SCDNR. And I think it's important to take a moment to recognize that we adapted this survey to SCDNR, specifically where the agency was named, in terms of naming the agency, showing the agency logo, and also showing which programs, services, and products are currently available from SCDNR with your feedback. So we have that experience with SCDNR programs and services, past financial contributions to SCDNR, likelihood to support SCDNR financially and through conservation behaviors in the future, and the preferred forms of viewing support and communications from the agency. So what is a panel survey? It's a survey platform of individuals recruited to take surveys. It's a really good way to achieve sufficient data in a fast way. Respondents are compensated for their participation, but in order to ensure good data quality, we enacted a number of tools to make sure that we're getting the best data possible about wildlife viewers in South Carolina. And these included intention checks, time limits, and quotas. So attention checks are a series of statements scattered throughout the survey itself to sort of catch people who aren't necessarily paying attention to what they're answering. So for example, there's these two statements in the survey, which one might read, wildlife viewing is central to my life, and another that might read, wildlife viewing is not an important part of my life. And if a person said, I strongly agree to both of those statements, it sort of flags to us that they're not really paying attention and they might just be speeding through in order to get that final financial compensation. So if a person tripped 2 or more of those attention checks in the survey, they were then removed from our data set. So we're not showing people in our data today who sort of failed those attention checks. In addition, we have a minimum completion time based on our pilot surveys. So if they went faster than that minimum completion time, they would also be removed from the data set. This data set is now available, and I think most of you have been sent this, but I'll send a link in the chat right now as well. The data set doesn't just include this data set itself for South Carolina, first as a CSV file for those who use Excel or R to analyze data, but also as SAV, which is used in SPSS, the statistical package for social science, which is what we use to analyze our data. There's also a PDF of the survey instrument itself if you want to see the specific wording of any of the questions we asked, although it's also in the report, as well as a variable guide. So it lists in an Excel file the name of each variable, what the values could be, so you know exactly how to use the data. So if we don't go into something today, or we don't go into something in the report that you want to take a deeper look at, because there's so many different ways to fold the data, to pull things out and look at different groups, you now have this resource. In terms of our data analysis, we did descriptive statistics for our statewide results. So in a moment, we'll be able to see our graphs, and I'll be able to point out that we looked at South Carolina as a whole, and those will be our black bars. But we also used chi-square tests and t-tests to explore differences between consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife viewers. And I think it's really important to think about, there are very many people who participate in both wildlife viewing and hunting or fishing. And you'll see in a minute that it's about half of the state. But we did want to look at this group, although there are negative impacts of non-consumptive wildlife use and positive impacts, or impacts that might not result in the mortality of an animal in terms of consumptive use, such as catch and release fishing, although we included that in our definition of fishing. It's an interesting way to look at people who you might not be traditionally serving, the people who haven't participated in hunting and fishing before. But of course, if you want to look at another group, such as those who are beginner wildlife viewers, those who spent most of their time viewing around the home, you have that data set available for further analysis. So just to make sure we're clear on what we mean by consumptive and non-consumptive wildlife viewers, we define non-consumptive wildlife viewers as those who have not hunted or fished in the past 5 years, whereas those non-consumptive wildlife viewers were those who have hunted or fished in the past 5 years. And this came from our question on other forms of outdoor recreation, where we looked at things like camping, off-roading, and hunting and fishing. And in South Carolina, we had 48% of people who did not participate in hunting and fishing in the past 5 years, and 52% reported that they had. Going deeper into that, we see that a large percentage of those only fish and view wildlife at 34%. Only 3% only hunt and view wildlife, so they don't participate in fishing, and 15% fish, hunt, and view wildlife. So I think it's important to realize that your wildlife viewers in South Carolina, a lot of them are multi-recreationists, especially those people who participate in fishing. I also mentioned that one of the tools to ensure good data quality coming from online surveys are demographic quotas. And we use these quotas based on the survey of national wildlife-related recreation from 2016. And we used the national numbers. So these aren't specifically tailored to South Carolina because that data wasn't available, but we wanted to make sure we had a representative sample of wildlife viewers. And these quotas can help us do that. So we based our quotas on age, gender, and education. And we did achieve all of those quotas in South Carolina, with the mean age being 48, 25% of people between 18 and 34, 36% being between 35 and 54, and 39% being 55 or older. We had 51% men. Oop, go back 2 slides. I think we skipped forward on accident. 51% men, 49% women, and less than 1% identifying as non-binary. And we also offered a chance for people to self-describe their gender identity, but I don't believe that anyone in South Carolina chose that option. And 34% of survey respondents of wildlife viewers in South Carolina had more than, oh, no problems, Ashley, more than 4 years of higher education. In terms of ethno-racial identity, we offered a list based on the US Census, and we allowed people to choose more than one option. So we found that 83% of people chose white, and they may have chosen another option. So then we have 79% of people identifying as white solely, and 21% identified as Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So with that being 13% Black, 5% Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish, 2% Indigenous, 1% Asian, and less than 1% identifying as Middle Eastern or North African, or Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander. In terms of household income, about half of respondents reported total household income of $49,999 or less, while 18% reported a total household income of $100,000 or more. And this is our first graph of the day. I want to point out that we have these black hash marks on our statewide graph because in a number of states, some people didn't answer the other forms of outdoor recreation question. They skipped the question. So there might be a slight difference in sample size between that statewide and not consumptive, non-consumptive. So we didn't compare in terms across that, but that is the entire sample size would be our black with white stripes. Our green will be our consumptive wildlife viewers, or those who have participated in hunting and fishing, and purple will be the non-consumptive viewers and those who don't hunt or fish in the past 5 years. So we can see from this graph that over half of our survey respondents said that they lived in an urban area or small city. Now, this is self-described and it's not based on their zip code, so that's important to keep in mind. Some people might misidentify where they live or have a different perception than the zip code might say, and 23% lived in a statewide. And here in the corner, you can see our statistical significance. And we did find a statistically significant difference between our consumptive and non-consumptive viewers. And so you can see in these bars that a much higher percentage of non-consumptive viewers lived in small cities. And this is our forms of wildlife viewing, or coming from that screening question that I mentioned earlier. And our top form of wildlife viewing in South Carolina was visiting parks and natural areas for the purpose of wildlife viewing, with a much higher percentage of consumptive viewers participating in this. This was followed by feeding wild birds, where there wasn't a statistically significant difference. So pay attention to these stars where we have the individual tests looking at the differences between consumptive and non-consumptive viewers, all the way down to maintaining plantings or natural areas, which was our least popular form of wildlife viewing, but still with about 30% of wildlife viewers participating. So people are participating in a number of forms of wildlife viewing. With that, I'll hand it back over to Ashley to go into our 5 key insights from the wildlife viewer survey.
All right, thanks so much, Christy. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, we've organized a lot of our results around the recommendations section of the report. So, and we're going to use that here today to help focus in on what we think would be most valuable to you. So the key recommendations that we're going to be talking about are how you can better support wildlife viewers in South Carolina. One, by providing more wildlife viewing information and access. So we'll show you what we found along those lines. 2, by promoting around the home viewing opportunities. And again, we'll emphasize the insights that are relevant there. And then 3, by developing social support networks for wildlife viewers. And then additionally, we recommend that SDDNR focus on broadening relevance to wildlife viewers who don't hunt and fish. And we'll show you the results that relate to that. And then developing financial contribution opportunities for wildlife viewers as well. So let's focus first on this, providing information and access. We provided viewers with a long list of ways that SDDNR might better support wildlife viewing. for them based upon a list that we worked with the state agencies to develop. And I'll show you that full list in a moment. But I wanted to start by calling out the top items here, and in a way that you could really clearly see that information is really what people were saying that they would most appreciate. And they said they want more information about where to go see wildlife, more information about wildlife in South Carolina, skipping over that middle one there, more information about how to view wildlife, and then finally more information about where and when to view wildlife where there's no hunting. And people were given the opportunity to select as many of the options as they want. So, they basically were checking off boxes for what would be useful to them. The middle item, more access to places to go viewing, also came up in your state and in many other states as well, and I'll come back to that in a moment. I promised first that I'd show you the full list so you can see all those info related items at the top, as well as access there in number 3. I want to remind you about these slides, just like Christy was showing them before. The statewide results are basically your whole sample. And that was the results I just showed you on the previous slide. But you can also see that the patterns held for what was most popular for consumptive in green and non-consumptive viewers in purple, but just that the consumptive viewers were higher each time, or on most of those items. So they were even more interested in getting support of their wildlife viewing activities. And this is, again, another pattern that we've seen in other states and has been surprising to some people because they say, oh, well, I thought the people who fished and hunted wanted that the most from our state agency. But you actually see here that they also are really interested in having their viewing activities supported as well. And all the places that you see a star here are places where there is a significant difference between consumptive and non-consumptive groups. So, and you can see that many of those differences of consumptive folks wanting more, or more consumptive folks wanting those specific support activities are actually significant differences. Okay, so let's talk a little bit then about ways that agency, or that visitors to your agency website might receive that additional information. Christy and Emily have checked out lots of state agency websites because this interest in information has come up again and again. And we saw on your website that you have this great resource where people can check out all your public lands and see what's available for them to do on those public lands. And that binocular icon comes up and again. So you do have nature viewing opportunities available in these places and are providing people with information about how to get there and what's offered at those sites. It may also be useful to think about putting more information on your website or through other means on how to view wildlife or what species people might view. And then additionally, with that interest in around the home viewing that we saw and that we'll come back to later in the presentation, that could be something to think about as well, is whether there would be a way to support people viewing at places beyond the lands that you all manage. An example website that we wanted to call out is from Virginia DWR, and we worked with them on a wildlife viewing project before. We worked on this multi-state project. And their website revision really does serve wildlife viewers now. You can see that one of the main menu options is viewing, so people don't have to search for finding the viewing related information. And then once they get into that section, it calls out key things like where to view wildlife, the birding basics, or a way to say how to view wildlife. And then places you can go like festivals. And then it points people to wildlife cameras where they can basically view wildlife through their computer at home on a couple of wildlife cameras that the state agency manages or works in collaboration on. One thing that I did want to make sure that everyone saw in the report and was aware of is that the strong interest in basic information that really helps point people to how and where to be viewing wildlife is likely due to the relatively low level of experience or expertise of wildlife viewers in general in your state. So we asked people to self-assess their skill level from beginner to expert, and you can see that 66% of your state's wildlife viewers self-identify as beginner or novice. And that's particularly the case with non-consumptive viewers. You can see those purple bars are higher for the beginner and novice groups. And again, I think this is surprising to a lot of folks working in agencies, because you typically hear from viewers who might be affiliated with a birding club or an Audubon chapter, and they tend to be the more experienced wildlife viewers. But if you look more generally across the whole population of wildlife viewers, as we were able to survey in this study, you really do find that you have a lower level of expertise. So supporting them in this more basic way can be really valuable. So we focused on the website because it was a most popular way that people were interested in receiving information from your state agency, but they also were interested in printed materials, email updates, and Facebook. We looked into a variety of other social media opportunities, but Facebook was the one that really jumped out for the largest proportion of participants. So here's the full list of options that we gave people. You can see that these top ones that were over 40% or close to 50% really stood out more than something like a text alert or TikTok or Twitter, which were a much smaller percentage of the population. Even, receiving information through one-on-one interaction with staff was quite low as well. So this could be useful for all the communication staff online to think about prioritization. I know some state agencies have thought about whether or not it's useful to try to branch out into some new aspects of social media. One thing that I will say is we haven't done this analysis by different demographics, and that could be a really useful follow-up for you all to explore if you want to use this to help guide some of your communications decisions. And I would expect from analysis that we did do in Virginia when we were working with them, that you can see age differences based upon these communications mechanisms. So if you are trying to reach out to younger audience, it could be useful to focus in more on TikTok, even though only about 20% of the respondents here said they were interested in receiving info that way. So the other question that we have based upon these results is that finding that people said they were interested in more places to view wildlife. And given all of their desire to also receive information about where to view wildlife, we're not sure if that interest is because they don't know where to be going or because there isn't a place for them to go. And that's unfortunately something that we can't find out from the survey results themselves. We did find that 60% of them said that they participate in viewing on state managed lands. So that's certainly a place where you all can focus on infrastructure and outreach and really making sure that those are key useful places for viewing, I heard from you all at the beginning of the presentation and here saw you could be as well. But the other thing I think to keep in mind is it could be useful to think about where are all of your state lands across the state compared to where urban populations are, because we saw that so many people were in urban areas or small cities. And it may be that some of this feeling of lack of access is because it takes a lot of effort and time to get to those locations. And we did hear from viewers that distance to viewing locations is the top barrier to them participating more in viewing, and followed by lack of free time, which can also then be tied to distance, right? If you don't have a lot of time, you can't go very far to do something. And then also the financial cost, which can also be tied in as well if it costs a lot to get somewhere. So in sum, I think it's useful to keep exploring and thinking about this desire for more access to viewing and ways that might be able to be achieved, where it's minimizing the distance people have to go and their lack of free time and the financial cost. And I see that Anna has added in the chat that you all have a recent directive that state government devices are not allowed to use TikTok. So not an option for you all at this point. Okay, so next up, talking about promoting around the home viewing opportunities. And Christy, am I going to turn this one over to you?
Yes, you are. Thank you. Well, when we think about those three top barriers, and we did have a really long list of different barriers that people could say to what degree it affected them. If you think about distance, time, and lack of money, really the key thing would be to promote around the home viewing opportunities. And this really is a space where state agencies can take charge and lead the way in providing information on how people can view around the home. Instead of maybe creating new ways to provide access, you bring the access to them. So in terms of wildlife viewing locations, we mentioned that 60% of people in the state with far more consumptive wildlife viewers are participating on these state managed areas. And I do want to note that we provided examples of what a state managed area might be, like a wildlife management area. These weren't tailored to the state, but we did provide examples, and you can see those in the PDF of our survey instrument. So if that might be of interest. But we can see 79% of people, with no difference between consumptive and non-consumptive viewers, are participating in wildlife viewing at their own home or property. And then this in third is those locally managed areas like county parks and trails, with over half of wildlife viewers participating. And then their property of friends and family. So really with that in mind, you really were reaching the most amount of people if you promote around the home viewing opportunities. And this could be a sphere where you could connect with other partners and types of organizations that are already more active in this field if you're not, because they have that sort of direct line to people who feed wild birds at home and how to feed wild birds responsibly. Yeah, you can go ahead to that next slide, Ashley, because we did look at conservation behaviors with or in support of SCDNR in the next 5 years if they were given the opportunity to do so. And really that top item, and this has come out in every single state, is cleaning up trash or litter, with over half of respondents saying that they were very likely or extremely likely to do that in conjunction with their state. So we know that people are interested in cleaning up trash and litter, and the same was in terms of generally participating in cleaning up trash or litter. But we might also want to take the time to incorporate other aspects of conservation, including enhancing wildlife habitat for the benefit of wildlife at their home, as well as collecting data on wildlife or habitat, which, as someone who studies participatory science, I'm always sad to see it was low at the bottom, but maybe that's a space for encouragement. And in general, we had that over 57% of people were very or extremely likely to engage. 34% were extremely likely to participate in civic engagement related to wildlife conservation, and 33% were likely to purchase environmentally friendly products with their agency. So with that in mind, our final recommendations in terms of supporting wildlife viewers themselves, we developed social support networks for wildlife viewers. We asked wildlife viewers to what extent they perceive different forms of social support, this being family, friends, peers, and mentors, from not at all to it, they strongly support their participation in wildlife viewing. And we found by far that wildlife viewers were supported most strongly by family and friends, and this was followed by peers and finally with mentors. And we've really identified this relationship across all of the states that I've worked on, that mentorship was really a space that state agencies can sort of continue to fill or foster, having a growth of mentorship for wildlife viewers. Specifically for those groups which are historically underserved by state agencies, such as Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We found that 21% of wildlife viewers in South Carolina were Black, Indigenous, or people of color. And this is in comparison to the US Census data of 37% of the South Carolina population is Black, Indigenous, or people of color. So there is an underrepresentation, which is often found in activities like birding. And this is the DON'T loop, which was developed to sort of say, if you don't meet others who are engaged in a particular activity, the odds are you will not take interest in that activity itself. So with this underrepresentation, developing those social support networks is really important, especially partnering with organizations and groups that can develop family, friends, and mentorship style relationships between wildlife viewers. And as we mentioned earlier, in South Carolina is really leading the way in terms of community engagement, and we've presented this case study to many other states, and this case study in conjunction with their own state results have really inspired them to move forward with engaging with BIPOC wildlife viewers. So I just wanted to point out that this data should support further continuation of this good work. We also asked wildlife viewers about accessibility challenges related to wildlife viewing. And we used a definition established by Birdability, which is a nonprofit organization for accessibility in birding. And we sort of adapted this definition to apply to wildlife viewing, and we presented the definition to the survey respondents. This definition read, accessibility challenges are the difficulties someone experiences in interacting with or while using the physical or social environment while trying to engage in a meaningful activity such as wildlife viewing. This may be a result of a mobility challenge, blindness or low vision, intellectual or development disabilities, including autism, mental illness, being deaf or hard of hearing, or other health concerns. And we asked these wildlife viewers to what extent they felt that they experience accessibility challenges while participating in wildlife viewing. And we found that 35% of wildlife viewers experience somewhat, quite a bit, or a great deal of accessibility challenges when wildlife viewing. So this really is a group to which the state agency can really start to provide support. And this may happen by partnering with organizations like Birdability to support this group and understanding what their needs and desires are when wildlife viewing. One resource that I want to point out is this map created by Birdability, where it's a crowdsourced map where people can describe the accessibility features of different birding sites. And it's free to add in this information. I'm going to send a link now to describe these sites so people know what they're able to participate in wildlife viewing at. And so you can see in South Carolina that a lot of these described sites are centered around urban areas from Charleston, Savannah, and up to Greenville. So it might be important to sort of expand these site descriptions to rural areas or continue to populate the map. And I think with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Ashley to talk about those non-consumptive wildlife viewers.
Yeah, thanks so much, Christy. So as I mentioned before, we're going to specifically look at how you can expand your relevance to viewers who don't hunt or fish. And that's because we found that consumptive and non-consumptive viewers are having a different experience with SCDNR. And it really seems that there's an opportunity to be increasing basic familiarity and providing tailored support to non-consumptive viewers, and that a lot of those activities would also be of benefit and interest to consumptive viewers as well. So first, the basic question of how familiar are viewers with SCDNR. The top bar here shows the statewide data. And you can see that about half of the people in the state are saying that they're moderately familiar to extremely familiar with your agency. And I should say half the viewers in the state. But there's a difference here if we look at consumptive viewers versus non-consumptive viewers. You can see that percentage in dark colors indicating extremely familiar or very familiar is a much larger section of the graph for consumptive viewers than non-consumptive viewers. If we add those two up, we're looking at 34% versus 14% of viewers saying that they are very familiar, extremely familiar with the agency. And likewise, those lighter colors, like not at all familiar, is 23% for consumptive viewers or non-consumptive viewers, but only 10% for consumptive viewers. So it really does seem that there's an opportunity to be building familiarity with non-consumptive viewers. We also looked at this by looking at logo recognition in states and provided people with an image of your South Carolina DNR logo. And again, consumptive viewers had said that they'd seen that much more frequently than non-consumptive viewers, but still all of them at 70% or higher. So that part's pretty positive. And part of the familiarity, I think, also ties into the use of programs and services, and that can be a great way for participants in wildlife viewing to learn more about your agency. So if we look across this graph again, we can see that consumptive viewers have been participating in programs or services or taking advantage of programs or services offered by your state agency to a higher degree than non-consumptive viewers have. And that's particularly apparent when you look down at that last option, that someone should say, no, they have not participated in any programs or services in the last 5 years offered from the state agency. And that was 50% of non-consumptive viewers, compared to only a third of consumptive viewers. So again, these viewing related opportunities are being accessed more by your consumptive viewers than a newer audience. So potential, again, to try to build out the opportunities to connect with non-consumptive viewers, likely through many of these mechanisms, but just making them aware of those opportunities. We also were interested in what sort of ways are people contributing to the agency. A lot of states are only aware of how people are contributing through licenses or through fees, access fees. And so they were interested in voluntary contribution opportunities, how much of that's being utilized by a wildlife viewer, like a conservation license plate or like a donation opportunity. And then also non-voluntary contributions, whether or not those were being utilized by wildlife viewers as a way to support state agencies. So when we look first at those non-voluntary opportunities where you need to contribute in order to get something back for yourself, we can see that fishing licenses were most of interest or most utilized in the last 5 years as a way that people contributed to agencies. And that percentage of consumptive viewers is quite high. Not quite as high as the percentage of people who said that they have participated in fishing, but we were looking at a slightly different timeline there. So there could be some changes over time. Likewise, if we look across this whole list, you can see the consumptive viewers are the ones who are utilizing these opportunities to contribute to the agency. But most of these opportunities are focused on consumptive use, like hunting or angling, with the exception of the land's access pass or entrance fee, or maybe a fee for a program or event. And then I also wanted to point out that other than the fishing license, most of these are somewhere around 40 to 20%. Now, this is in stark contrast to the voluntary opportunities where nothing's above 20%. So those options where people aren't required to contribute, of course, aren't being used as much. But again, we still see that the consumptive viewers are contributing a bit more. And I'm not very surprised about this, because it seems likely that if people are more familiar with your agency, seeing benefits from your agency through programs and services, they also are going to be more likely to contribute to their agency. We asked people whether or not they felt that SCD&R prioritizes programs and services that support viewing adequately. And they had the options of saying they think it's too much currently to too little currently, or too high to too low. And you can see positively that about 2/3 of the respondents said it's the right amount right now. We appreciate what's going on for wildlife viewers, but there was also a common feeling from about 1/3 of both the consumptive and non-consumptive group that the prioritization is too low or far too low. And very few people in any of the groups said they feel like it's too high or far too high. So I think all of that to say that you have about 1/3 of your population of viewers who would be happy to see you doing more for wildlife viewers, and probably very few who would feel like they don't want to see you doing more. Okay, so then in terms of developing financial contribution opportunities for viewers in the future, we looked at people's interests in contributing in the ways that were already an option within their state, as well as additional options that your state might not have. So Anna helped us look through that list of financial contribution options and make sure that we only showed the ones for the past that actually are an option. So fishing licenses comes up again. This overlap between viewing and fishing is quite high. And seems like there's a lot of potential for getting even more viewers into fishing, since this 56% is higher than the percentage of overlap we saw between the two. And then likewise, lands access passes, permits, or entrance fees. This is a higher percentage than we saw where we're purchasing these in the past, and certainly a much higher percentage for fees for a program or event than we saw in the past. And it may be because those programs and events just aren't as readily available for people to sign up for and pay for. So that might be a place to expand out your programming as a fundraising opportunity. And then similarly, a lot of these voluntary opportunities like tangible products, conservation lottery ticket, and direct donation of money to the agency were of a lot of interest to people, them saying that they'd be moderately to extremely likely to spend money in this way in the coming years compared to how much they have in the past. So again, those might be things to build out and think about how to best reach people related to them and how to make it of interest to them. One insight that we do have about making it of interest to them is that we heard from people that if it was clear to them that their funds were going towards an array of different species conservation opportunities or viewing opportunities, they would be more likely to give. So knowing that it's not just going to a general fund would likely increase their interest in these voluntary opportunities. An example of a state that's tried to utilize this approach is Virginia's DWR's Restore the Wild program, where they've created sort of a new vision of their lands access pass so that people can donate to the agency like you would as a member of a nonprofit organization. And through those donations, you also then receive a lands access pass. So it was meant to be a wildlife viewer specific funding mechanism, really targeting that audience, although they have expanded it out to others. Like there's a running event that they have and walking event where they try to encourage people to participate and restore the wild as well. But this could be a way to think about how to market a donations program specifically to viewers. And if you're interested in reading more about this, there is the case study write-up on it in the recommendations section of the national and regional report. And here's just a little look about the three different types of memberships they offer and the types of benefits that people get. And then additionally, all of these folks receive an update at least once a year on how the money has been spent. All of their money is going towards habitat conservation, and it calls out the very specific habitat conservation projects so that people can see that, yes, my money mattered and it actually resulted in habitat on the ground. So those are the highlights from your survey and the associated recommendations that we wanted to call out. I wanted to mention what's next for your involvement as well as the broader project. And I say that because you all are going to be involved in the next phase, which is exciting. So we have received a phase 2 multi-state grant from the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We're currently still in the grant writing or the contracting process with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but we're slowly ramping up on the project so that we can get going this year. We've been told that we can bill back to the beginning of the year. So with this multi-state grant, we're going to be distributing the results even further. So all of the state agencies that had a state-specific report have had state agency-specific webinars, as well as we provided a webinar for the national and regional report. But we are hoping to attend all of the AFWA meetings, the regional AFWA meetings, as well as the national North American meeting, and present at sessions and also within committees about these results so that all different agency staff can be aware of them. We're also attending conferences and providing workshops at some of those so that we can reach a broader audience of wildlife professionals. Then the key part that we're really excited about is we're working with a community of practice of state agencies who are committed to spending time in the coming year trying to create a new project, revamp an existing project based upon survey results. And that community of practice is going to meet monthly, or at least one representative from each state will get together monthly to share what they're working on, any challenges they're facing, to work together on giving each other advice on their plans for it, on how to evaluate its success. And then they'll go back and work with a team within their state as well. And fortunately, I believe you all are signed up to be involved in that. So it's going to be great to work with you on that. And ultimately, then at the end of the project, in a little over a year, we're going to have a website that can be shared with state agencies across the US so that they can see these examples of states who have revamped or created new wildlife viewing programs and projects in order to serve viewers and utilize these survey results. And we're hoping to share resources and examples there. There's a subgroup from the Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group that's developing template materials that might be useful for websites or for printed materials related to that info that people are seeking related to wildlife. So there's lots of opportunities to then be able to share so that not everybody's recreating the wheel, and they can all more quickly be developing opportunities for that. And you can see in the chat that Amanda's called out that she's the contact from your agency for that phase. So if anyone wants to talk with her more about that, you can reach out to her. Additionally, we're going to be doing more analysis on rural as compared to urban viewers, since that was a strong interest coming out of the Academy for Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism last February when we shared these initial results. And then there's plenty of other opportunities for things that can be considered. And as Christy called out earlier, you all have the data set, so you might want to look at things like income level differences, or how specialized or expert a viewer is, or their age. And we are looking more at accessibility challenges across all of the states. Emily's working on a thesis chapter based upon that as well. We'll be sharing more of these results and additional analyses that we're doing at the Pathways Conference, which is a conference traditionally focused on human dimensions professionals. And this year, the emphasis is on bringing that human dimensions insight on wildlife viewers, on people with values really strongly connected to protecting wildlife, to a broader audience. So the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies is co-hosting this conference this year with CSU, Colorado State University, and also Virginia Tech. And the hope is that we'll have lots of state agency staff there who are interested in digging into and thinking about how to broaden their connections with people who are different than their traditional audience. Additionally, our community of practice is going to have a one-day meeting at the start of this conference is what we're proposing. So Amanda, we're going to be reaching out to you soon to make sure you or someone else from your staff can attend that. So it's hopefully an opportunity to get together in person as well. So with that, just a reminder to please check out the full report. You can see more about what we've talked about here. The executive summary is a nice way to get a look across all of the insights. And then the recommendation section is also a key place to take a look and see what we've called out there, many of the things that we covered here today. And if you would like to, you can also then dig in on certain sections of the results for things that might be most of interest to you, like communications or like funding mechanisms. So with that, here's the contact information for me and Christy. Feel free to reach out to us if you have any specific questions about the report. I should say Christy's the key person to go to. I'm currently on sabbatical and working half-time with National Audubon Society during my sabbatical. So I'm not great at my Virginia Tech email right now. So she's the key person to ping. And then of course you have Anna and Amanda within your state agency as good contacts for you too. And now we have time. Looks like we have, how much time do we have here? We have about 15 minutes or so for any questions that anyone has. You can feel free to put them in the chat or come off of mute. We do have a QR code here for an evaluation survey, and Christy's also put it in the chat pod. super short survey just asks you what you got out of the presentation today, what we could do better, and then also what sort of results you are really interested in applying. And that piece will be really helpful to us as we work on the phase 2 of the project to make sure that that's going to be part of the toolkit for various other state agency staff who aren't part of the community of practice. So I'm actually going to turn off the presentation so I can more easily see you all. Let's see, stop sharing. There we go. And so anyone who wants to raise their hand or just turn on their video or come off of mute, you're welcome to. We're a small enough group that we can easily manage that. And there's Anna. So Anna, is there anything that we missed or that you want to emphasize or that we should stress here today?
Well, I'll first say I really appreciate you going through this. And for those that were not able to read the report, both the South Carolina report and the national, this was really helpful to have a slide presentation of it and to see the graphics and to have you guys to explain it. I know that Tanya gave you some feedback earlier after reading it. And so in your final report, if anything that's said here today or in the past, if you feel like you might get those some kind of questions or head scratching from other people as they read their reports, you could add those caveats or explanations within the report to say, hey, this was either outside the scope or we can only work with the number of people that actually respond. You know, when we talked about demographics and feeling like, did we really hit as many people as we want, or is there room for a more targeted approach towards folks like in Alex's shop that she's trying to get more engaged and things like that. I took kind of some of my own notes as far as things that I've always kind of wanted our agency to do to reach out to wildlife viewers, as we're calling them right here. One of them was like an urban wildlife program that would get at helping our non-consumptive folks who want to know more info on where to view, what species they might actually encounter. I mean, even the simplest stuff like, what do I need? Yeah, you need a pair of binoculars, you need some hiking boots. We're not endorsing any particular brand, but this is what you need in order to see these kinds of things. Places, outing ideas in their own neighborhood or what's in your region in a 20-mile radius or something like that, working with our partners like PRT or the Forest Service, giving school programs on our different habitats and species. And again, like I said, targeting the underserved groups and mentoring them. But also something near and dear to my heart is I have a son who is physically disabled. He's been in a wheelchair since birth. He is nonverbal. There's nothing wrong with his brain, but accessing particular places. And I know that when you want to go see wildlife, you need to go to places that are a little bit more removed so that you can actually see wildlife. But there are ways that we can enhance places that we do have that give them a decent experience without tiring them and still giving them enough smattering of things to see that it's not like, here's a blue jay, here's a cardinal, here, you know, something like that. So I think there's a lot we can do. And I did check out the birdability map and the template of what you actually fill out when you go to places about accessibility. And I thought it was really, really neat. So we are doing a lot now with GIS, and we have a strong presence with our Esri program. And so some of these, we have new abilities now to create more apps and do more with social media than we have in the past. So I think it's kind of an exciting time. And I'm sure that Amanda or Tanya and those folks that have kind of read through these reports might have more to add. But again, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, Anna, thanks so much. And it's great to hear about all of those ideas that you have to sort of flesh out the recommendations and make them, you know, things that you all can be implementing in your state. So I hope that you all do run with some of that. Also did want to emphasize that hopefully Tanya felt like her feedback has been heard. Christy provided further explanation on the panel survey approach, and then also shared the language that we added to the report to address that too.
I
okay.
did. Thank you so
Great.
much for y'all's quick attention to that too. I appreciate that.
Great. Thanks so much, Tanya. I appreciate your feedback on that. All right, Amanda, I see you got your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to give a real quick update to the DNR folks on the call. And y'all, we recently transitioned our fishing access and boat landings over to the Esri platform from an internal database that was full of several glitches and bugs. We are starting the process on the managed land side to also completely transition all of our managed lands over to Esri. And very excited about that, because that will really allow us to focus on the data that's in there instead of right now our GIS team's been focusing on trying to keep things afloat. They have worked very hard over the last couple months to really update some of our public lands information. And over the next couple months, people on this call will start seeing some mock-ups and drafts of what that new information will look like. And I think will be much more similar to what you see from the Virginias than where we have. So that is an exciting project that it's rolling, but it's still pretty at the beginning. But definitely by this time next year, we should be completely, fully transitioned all of our public access information from internal databases to Esri.
That's awesome to hear. And yeah, huge undertaking. So glad to hear that you've got that underway, and will be great for providing the additional information that people are looking for about those locations. So very cool. Amanda, is that the project that you all will be working on as part of the community of practice, or do you have ideas for other projects?
We have several projects going on that would work with that. Another one that we actually are trying to finalize right now is a very similar survey to this one, but focused specifically on Hispanic and Latino populations in the state. We're working with Clemson on that to finalize those. So I'm really interested to look at the results for a dedicated study to Hispanic populations compared with this more general study.
Yes, that would be great. We have from the national and regional data set plus all the state data sets pulled everything together. So we've been able to look at some of those insights across the US, but within a given state, we don't have a large enough representative population of respondents from any given ethnic group in order to be able, or racial group in order to be able to do that. So that's great to hear that you have a survey that is zeroing in on that. And I see Alex already is sharing that there's some initial results that are some similarities. So that would be great to see and hear more about how what you all find in comparison.
The other thing that I've noticed, and sometimes dealing with other groups, other cultural groups, especially in some of my interactions with Native American tribes, is it's very difficult to engage them with just the stranger coming in and saying, can you do this survey? Even if there is the carrot of you'll get paid for your time, there often has to be an introduction from someone who says, we would like, you know me, you trust me, I would really like your input. Would you please participate in this sort of thing? And I know that's hard to get to in a statistically significant survey where you want a smattering of everybody. But if you were to do some targeted things for different cultural groups, be aware of cultural differences that cause people not to want to do surveys and things. So I just put that out there.
Yeah, it's a great point. We had a spin-off contract with Minnesota DNR to get some of that information for them through focus groups. And yeah, it's been a completely different approach. We've worked with a variety of organizations that are communities that already have connections with those groups. I mean, you all have the benefit that Alex and Diana have been building those relationships from your agency, which a lot of state agencies don't have. So you already have a lot of that trust built. So it's great that you all were able to use that for the Hispanic and Latino survey. But certainly hear what you're saying, Anna, when it comes to Indigenous groups, it's another set of relationship building and trust building in order to get that information. And, you know, also people having to feel like it's going to be used in a way that's going to benefit them and not just, you know, for some other group to have info about them, but they never see the benefits.
Yeah, nobody likes a box check, but I am going to brag on Alex and her whole team, because I like to do this whenever I can. Is they were recognized by the Wildlife Society, the National Wildlife Society, for their outreach efforts and everything. So we're really, really proud to have them kind of leading us on some of these things.
Awesome. Congrats, Alex and Diana and others. That's great. Amanda, is it a new hand raised? I think it is.
It is. Sorry,
Yeah.
I just wanted to put out there for, again, this group, we actually have started a new training for just that. And in our first training is going to be in mid-February with the Coastal Carolina University. 2 professors are going to come and speak with OMO employees about how to best communicate with the African American population, how to, you know, ensure what we may think they may take something offensive that we don't, you know, just kind of go through those high level things. We have sent that out to several of the education staff around the agency, but we do have a few spots available for that training February 13th. If anyone would like to attend, it's going to be at Watery River, and it's going to be just that. And really, like, how do we can't do blanket communications for every single audience. So as OMO, we're going to start having trainings on different audiences and what we need to be aware of.
It's great to hear, Amanda. Thanks. Any other, someone else chime in? No. Okay, Anna?
Oh, I was just going to answer Amanda. That's really good to know. And if my calendar is open, I'd like to attend. I know that I've been trying to, I've learned a lot from our archaeology department as well, because they deal with SHPO and things like that. And I wondered if they have been invited as well, or maybe they're helping you. I don't know, with some of these communication, cultural communications. Meg is really good at it.
I see Alex responding in the chat that they have, and that Meg will be there.
Okay, perfect. That's good.
Okay. Yeah.
I like the more the merrier, and there's lots of
Connecting
really
everybody
good
in the
people.
agency,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Very easy to have your own silos. Any other questions or comments? We have probably time for one more. All right. Well, if we don't, Christy, could you put the link to the evaluation survey in the chat again? Oh, I see Alex is raising her hand, but while Christy's doing that, just a reminder to everybody, if you can provide quick, brief feedback at the end, we'd appreciate it. And Alex, you get to have the final question or comment.
So my only question has to do with the way the surveys were distributed, because they were all online. And what kind of database did you use for that? And also, were there any concerns that maybe some people that don't have access to technology maybe didn't reply to the surveys? And also, if you are allowed to share that with us, like how much money they get for the survey. Just curious, because like Amanda said, we are doing the Hispanic survey, and like we struggle trying to get as many people as we wanted to. So
Yeah, Christy, maybe do you want to just talk briefly about the panel survey and how that comes together, and then I can address the financial piece and the technology piece.
Yeah, of course. So we used Qualtrics and we contracted through them, and they're one of the largest or the largest panel survey company in the US. And they have their own databases. And we were in close contact with them throughout the survey. So that's things like airline miles, people who sign up to take surveys for those financial compensations, things like apps. I've done that before, where you have an app and sort of you get those financial compensation. So we were in close contact with them specifically about that financial compensation piece, on whether we're skewing the data towards lower income, but looking at that in terms of the National Wildlife Viewer Survey, we didn't find any evidence of that. But it is something to keep in mind that these surveys might be skewing towards lower income individuals.
And then the piece that I can add is I don't know the exact amount they were paid. They don't tell us that.
Yeah.
And there's actually some variation in how much someone's paid as to which group they had to contract out to. We had to pay them $8 per individual. And so people were getting paid less than that for the survey that tended to take them somewhere. What was the average, Christy? 10 to 15 minutes, 15 minutes for the survey. And so I can't tell you the exact amount, because it is really variable based upon how much they were pushing and which group they were going towards, because, you know, they were managing a survey of 20,000 respondents for us. In terms of technology, so the interesting thing is the majority of people who take these surveys are using their phones. And so it's not that people actually have to have a computer and ability to do that. And there are a lot of people with cell phones that can do that. Of course, there's still going to be a percentage of people that you miss, probably older population that don't use cell phone or computer. But that said, within those broad categories that we had for the demographics, we still had adequate sampling. The thing with survey research is there's bias everywhere. It is impossible to do a survey where you get everyone to respond. I mean, we even saw that with the census recently, right? Where there's so many resources put into it, and there still was a lot of non-response going on. So yeah, it's a challenge, and you always have to weigh, you know, what can you accomplish, and you know, what do you feel most comfortable with having as the place where you may have a bit of bias in your responses. And we felt like the online panel was really a good way to go. And actually, for the National Survey of Hunting, Fishing, and Wildlife Recreation, that's now the direction they've gone with that too, due to a combination of just the cost becoming too much to do things in person, but also the challenge of you know, not getting good response via the phone anymore, because everybody's got caller ID, or, you know, has their cell phone that you can't even find their phone number listed in any phone book, for example. So yeah, that's a consideration for sure. One thing that has been shown costly, but if there are communities, if you're reaching out to Hispanic population where you know that's where a lot of people live, that has been shown to have a pretty high response rate, where you drop off the survey to people and you come back and pick up the survey from them a few days later. But yeah, you have to have a lot of money to make that work. All right, well, we are at the end of our time. Thanks so much for all of your time, everyone. We hope to continue working with some of you through the community of practice. We hope to see some of you at the Pathways Conference or next year's Academy, Wildlife Viewing and Nature Tourism Working Group Academy. And we hope to hear about how you all implement these results, additional things that you find and think about, and we hope that it'll be useful to you along the way. So thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank y'all so much. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome. Thank you, Anna, and look forward to working with you, Amanda, in the next phase.
Thank you, Ashley and Christy.
Thanks, Greg.
Thanks all.
You're welcome, Tanya.